Howdy. So my name's Jamie Skella, and I'm the co-founder of an Australian technology startup named Contact Light. When George asked me to come and speak on the topic of building better products, the first thing that sprang to mind, in fact, wasn't about execution. It was a lot deeper than that. It was about what is the precursor, what is the enabler for building better products, and it's in fact about productivity and culture. Over the past sort of 15 years, I've worked for a lot of these big brands and big products and some small ones as well, but over that 15 years, there was a sort of recurring themes in regards to why we weren't as successful as we'd liked, why our products perhaps weren't as good as they could have been. And I thought that to frame that problem, this image is probably a relatively apt symbol. It's obviously quite funny, but behind every joke is, of course, a little bit of truth. And when you start to think about why this is the case, why maybe someone isn't enjoying their mornings, maybe why they're not willing to talk to colleagues, maybe why they're not sort of, in full gear, so to speak. Is it because they were up too late the night before? Is it because we're requiring them to get up too early, repetitively? Is it because maybe they just work better in the afternoon? You've got pragmatic thinkers who tend to be early risers, and you have creatives who very often tend to do their best work in the afternoon and evening. So, in part of addressing this, I wanted to give a few examples, things that we now know based on research and real studies, which is simply that adding more hours to the workday does not actually correlate to higher levels of productivity. In fact, we've seen as we've gone from 10 hours to 8 hours, and now in Sweden, 6 hours, productivity actually increases for a whole range of reasons, but staff satisfaction is one of them. And I think the reason why there is sort of opposition to this is largely culture-based, and it's leadership philosophy-based. If you look at big corporates, the employee who comes in at 6 a.m. and leaves at 6 p.m. is often perceived as the better worker. But in fact, studies reveal that managers often don't know the difference between a staff member that's actually working 80 hours and one that's pretending to work 80 hours. The infamous Macintosh team, the guys that brought out that first Mac, they infamously wore t-shirts, priding themselves on their 60-hour work weeks. But now what we know based on behavioral psychology and the research done by productivity experts is that we would have gotten that Macintosh about a year ahead of schedule, well, a year ahead of when it was supposed to be delivered, if they'd actually cut that work day in half, that work week in half. Less than 3% of the population can actually sleep fewer than 6 hours per night and still be productive. The incredible thing here is that there's probably quite a few people who think, well, I'm a part of that 3%, but of that 3%, for every 100 people who believe they're part of this sleepless elite, 5 of them aren't. So it's a very, very slight chance that you have this biological and sort of cognitive makeup to be able to perform on a lack of sleep. So how have we fixed it? We've sort of set up what is effectively 7 sort of principles. These have really just been abstracted from our employee handbook, which is publicly available at handbook.contactlight.co. And I won't go into them in huge amounts of detail, so please feel free to read through that in your own time if you care to. The first one is work where you want. We're a completely distributed workforce, and that's a relatively recent eventuation from a partly distributed one. But what we know is that by killing the commute for staff, you actually deliver the perceived benefit to them of an approximate $55,000 in pay rise. So it's a big deal being able to remove that and give them flexibility to be able to work from a pub or a cafe. Can I just grab some water? Cheers.
We're going good for time, so.
Number 2, turn off your alarm. Should actually have probably been phrased, don't set an alarm. And it's one of our more controversial ones, but the basic rule of thumb here is that if you get to bed at a reasonable hour, you'll wake up at a reasonable hour. And again, it's about making sure that we are in sort of our prime to be able to doing our best work. So whether your body needs 6 hours of sleep tonight or 9 hours, that's fine. Take the time, because then you're going to be up on your sort of your body clock. It's going to be on your body's terms, not one of an alarm. Number 3 is work when the inspiration strikes. Part of the sort of mentality we've tried to cultivate at Contact Light, being that you can effectively work when you want, is that when inspiration strikes, or you have that sort of light bulb moment in the shower, or sitting on the couch at home, to capitalize on that, because it's hard to get that back, that little sort of spark of magic. And of course, take some time for yourself later, but we encourage the guys to, take that opportunity, do some work at, late at night or early in the morning, and they can take time for themselves to do whatever it else is they want to do at another time. Own the quality of your deliverables. It's pretty clear. I mean, we're a small team at the moment, so it's about making sure that everything that's handed over, because it can't be checked and double-checked, that if you're not proud of it, effectively ask the question, is it actually good enough? Experiment without permission is number 5. And this sort of plays on the permissionless innovation catchphrase that gets bandied about quite a bit, but I'm actually a big believer in it. Of course, before innovation becomes experimentation. So making sure that everybody involved in product at Contact Light has the control and the confidence to be able to go off there and try new things, even for breaks, because we'll just fix it. Use your best judgment. Very, very sort of similar to the last one, backing off that same concept. But again, we employ people because we believe they're brilliant, and we employ them because we need them to tell us what the right things to do are, rather than us try and dictate without specific sort of expertise in these various areas. And the last one is never stop learning. So it's really, really important for us that every time we encounter a new problem, that we revisit ways to solve that. So instead of fixing it the same way, we fixed it or solved it last week or last year, spending the time, be it an hour or a day, and making sure that you're always on the edge and you're doing the best possible work. What this all really boils down to for Contact Light is simply we have our eye on the results, not on the clock. So it all sounds pretty lofty, of course. Some of you might have heard about a working philosophy called ROWE, Results-Only Working Environment. That's kind of where we base this off. But it is working out pretty well. This slide here doesn't represent negatives or sacrifices. This slide, in fact, represents benefits. Our board was pretty blown away when we handed over our first budget because it seemed to have a whole lot of gaping holes. And we had a lot more money for things that we could spend on other initiatives as opposed to things like floor space, physical infrastructure, printers and papers, expensive work lunches and transport. And the reason we can do this is for a few reasons. One is that, as mentioned, we are distributed. So we've got 3 people in Melbourne right now. We've got 2 in Sydney, and we've got 1 in Brisbane. So what this enables is, of course, all those gains in sort of satisfaction and that sort of $55,000 pay rise concept. And that in itself is enabled by a set of modern tools and processes. This is kind of our business stack, I suppose, from top to bottom being left to right. And on the left we have Google Apps. We use them as sort of a north for most of our other services, but also things like shared calendars and live collaboration with documents. But we rarely use email because Slack has pretty much now dominated that inter-team communication for us. Everything is in Slack, from App Store reviews to builds being submitted to GitHub. It is the sort of single point of truth that delivers complete transparency and visibility to absolutely everybody in the team. We found that prior to moving to a fully distributed model, we would be having conversations here in the Melbourne office, which then would need to be relayed via Slack after the fact, or that we'd be sitting next to each other, talking to each other via Slack, despite the fact we were right next to each other. So that was part of the reason we moved to a distributed workforce, to actually get even additional efficiencies. Trello, I'm sure everyone's familiar with. GitHub, most people probably are. GitHub and Amazon AWS are probably 2 of the biggest pieces of the puzzle that allow us to work this way, simply based on the ability to scale up and down at a very cost-effective price point. In terms of applications, we've got an app called Otto. As of today, Otto is live bus tracking, point of interest database searching, and wayfinding for students at Curtin University in Western Australia. By the end of next week, we'll have a pretty major new build released, which includes a rebrand, as well as additional functionalities such as account creation and the ability for you to construct a friends list with fellow students, add them to a list, and be able to see them on campus, but only when they're on campus, and of course, only if they want. So we're seeing some good results. Otto itself probably took, all in all, 2 to 3 months of development time once we'd built the team and sort of really got stuck in. The latest function that I'm talking about in regards to friend sharing probably only took about 2 weeks, and we're testing that at pause right now. The other product is Get Embark. well, it's Embark. The website is getembark.io. Embark is effectively a travel, a commuter application for planning travel, their day-to-day sort of routine. And while it's not necessarily entirely different from apps like Move It and TripGo, we're doing what they do just as well. Another example, the City Mapper. But we've got some patented technology in there as well, which sort of boosts its value for large segments of the consumer market, which enables them to interact with screens in spaces along their daily commute without any need for things like QR codes or NFC. Obviously, those things become kind of dangerous when you are looking at a massive screen across a track in a station. So we've looked at ways to basically enable our mobile application to know exactly which screen you're next to and what content is playing on that screen just by being in its proximity. And if you walk a little way down the track to another screen, obviously what's on your mobile device right then will relate to that. An example of this in practice, other than the obvious, which is outright, e-commerce purchases, things like polls and surveys, things like downloading long-form content to short content trailers. So you might see a trailer for an episode of a TV show, and we would allow you to download the pilot for free. And then from that point, you could rate that, and if you liked it, we could upsell to things like the entire season at a discounted price. But the interaction that is perceived most positively at the moment is the ability for you to see a product that you like, such as a jacket, and to just mark it as something that you like. It goes into your sort of list within the application, and then when you walk past a retailer sometime into the future who's selling that jacket and they're selling it at a discounted price, we'll send you a push notification. So it's about giving the consumer a proactive ability to engage rather than us just sticking stuff in their face and following up them when we have the right offer. We're not alone, and I guess to sort of wrap up, there are lots of other companies doing similar things in terms of ways of working, and they are building great products. I'm sure you're familiar with all of the brands on this screen because they all make great stuff and they do great work. Netflix is a results-only working environment. Buffer is a completely distributed team. Basecamp has remained small on purpose because by staying small rather than forcing growth, they've been able to maintain satisfaction, great camaraderie, and have huge returns. They're obviously doing very well financially. GitHub's about 70% distributed. So these are all very good examples of how, by sort of challenging the status quo in relation to work process, business structure, that we can actually improve the lives of our employees and actually build these better products. Thank you.